Good morning, David Atkins, Target Individual. Today I'm going to talk about remote influencing, and I figured, well, my next few videos are going to be long with a lot of good information, and the information is very good, or I wouldn't be doing it, as you know. And they're going to be long, maybe 20, 30 minutes, but I promise you'll stay tuned because it's good information. So I figured I would get this last short thing. This covers this chapter right here covers the whole book. I've got videos doing the whole book of Guinea Pigs by John Hall. And this is the last thing I had to do a chapter on. It's called Remote Influencing. And like I said, the next few videos are going to be quite long with good information, and you'll want to stay tuned for them if you're trying to understand this stuff and how it works, and possibly, I encourage all target individuals, if they can, to possibly pass it on to somebody that's not a target individual, just to get the word out, because we target individuals know what's going on. Some may not know as much as others, but still we know. But the goal is to get it to people who don't know what's going on and wake them up. And I know you got to tread lightly when you're doing that, so you don't get made fun of, called crazy or whatever. But I figure there's enough proof, out here for, you can't have thousands, hundreds of thousands of people talking about the same stuff's happening to them. I mean, what kind of diagnosis you gonna give that? The targeted individual diagnosis? It's a diagnosis where people just come up with the same symptoms all around the world and think the same stuff's happening. Come on now. Anyway, enough of my little ranting and raving. Okay, this is called remote influencing. And he starts off with a Bible verse. I ain't even got to get one. It's for by thy sorceries were all nations deceived. In the New King James Version, it's by thy magic all nations were deceived. And I cannot remember. It's a longer verse than that, but he took that verse out of the whole. Revelations 18:23 is where it came from, and there's a lot more in there, but he took that out because it applied to this thing. And that's what this AI and stuff is. It's playing God. It's wrong. It's transhumanism at its finest. And one more little tidbit is, before I get started, is, did you know, and even you even got some high white collar people concerned about this, and I've seen the interviews with them and everything. AI, once it gets perfected, is going to take 65% of jobs. So then what are they going to do? They're going to have to depopulate. Okay, anyway, here we go. The Soviet Union was the first to recognize and research a very unique phenomenon amongst human beings called remote viewing or remote influencing. At first, though, it only existed in a handful of individuals with an innate ability. It is now thought to be a capability in most human beings with appropriate training. Remote influencing is the ability of an individual to view and interact with another individual in a remote location without physically connecting to that location. By definition, physically connecting would include traveling that location or connected via any form of synthetic communication technology. Remote viewing, similar to remote influencing, is the ability to see a remote location without physically traveling that location. The Soviet Union was much more interested in remote viewing than the pure surveillance method of remote viewing. As information about Soviet research found its way outside the Iron Curtain, the United States quickly found itself pursuing similar avenues of research. Stories of Soviet psychic research prompted the 1972 Defense Intelligence Agency report titled Control Offensive Behavior-USSR. The report alluded to the possibility of the research to enable them to know the contents of the United States classified documents, positions of troops, locations of military installations, and to modify the thoughts of personnel and cause death remotely via telepathy. The release of this report prompted a race for similar research in the United States by almost every branch of the DoD, as well as our intelligence agencies. In the Soviet Union, two scientists in particular are noted to have done the majority of the research into remote influencing. Dr. Leonard Vasilev, chairman of the psychology department at the University of Leningrad, headed up a very vigorous parapsychology research center. He is quoted as stating that the discovery of the energy underlying ESP would be equivalent to the discovered atomic energy. Vasilev's research was guided by electromagnetic hypothesis of telepathy put forth by neuroscientist Hans Berger. Berger's pursuit of measurable care of telepathy led to his discovery of the electrical potential of the brain we refer to as the EEG. Basil's research continued until his death in 1966. A revised English translation of his work was published in 1976 under the title Experiments in Distant Influence. He was able to remotely influence changes in subjects such as motor acts, visual images, sleepiness, remote influences changes in subjects such as motor acts, visual image. I'm sorry, I started all over. Wakefulness, I might as well say them again. Acts, visual images, sleepiness, remote influence, changes in subjects such as motor. I started again. Okay. Wakefulness and changes in electrodermal activity. His results were positive despite attempts at shielding the electromagnetic waves with iron, lead, and Faraday chamber screening material. The other Soviet researcher who spent much of his time studying telepathy and remote influencing was Professor I.M. Kogan, an electrical engineer. Kogan postulated that PSI was merely an extremely low-frequency radio system built into the human brain. Kogan's studies, as well as more modern studies, would demonstrate that electromagnetic shielding attempts would not successfully stop the phenomenon of remote viewing or remote influence. This perpetrated at extra low wave frequency, or ELF. Every time I say ELF, I'm saying extremely low frequency wave theory and the mode of delivery of telepathic phenomena. Electromagnetic shielding is known to have a little attenuation of ELF waves as they travel great distances. Opponents of the ELF wave theory argue that a bit of data transfer using ELF waves would not be great enough to communicate full sentences in a reasonable amount of time. However, as written in the chapter on MK Ultras, Dr. Mike Persinger's research focused heavily on ELF waves' effect on the human brain. Not to be left out of the race, the United States has begun its own research into remote viewing. The two names most recognized as having done most, if not all, of the research in remote viewing are Dr. Harold Puthoff and Dr. Russell Targ. In 1972, Office of Technical Services under directorship of Sidney Gottlieb, an MK Ultra contractor, awarded Dr. Puthoff his remote viewing funding. Codenamed Stargate and Grill Flame, the operations were not part of MK Ultra, were very close cousins to it. Both funding type of research, $20 million would be spent on remote viewing studies that were continued into the 1990s. The majority of the funding came from the CIA and DoD, with the bulk of the research being done at Fort Meade and Stanford Research Institute. Okay, and I'm going to come back here, but I'm going to read this. Taken at face value, the early research into remote viewing would appear to be unrelated to any of the issues regarding current covert experimentation. However, and I'm coming back to the other part. However, several things regarding remote viewing place its early research into question. This is not a question about legitimacy or methods of research. We know quite a bit about the Stargate studies through books written by its subjects and investigators. Puthoff and Targ have both published many of their declassified findings and have appeared on public radio stations. It is my opinion that the findings of Puthoff and Targ found to be positive were not necessarily the same findings the CIA were gleaning from their studies. Puthoff and Targ were mainly looking to prove that an innate human telepathic ability does exist and can be scientifically quantified and used in a positive manner. The CIA was more interested in byproducts of the research. First, the initial funding came from the official Office of Technical Services under the dictatorship of Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, an MK Ultra subcontractor. Secondly, in addition to establishing remote viewing as possible, it was discovered that part of the brain plays a role in its function. Thirdly, through the use of the anechoic chambers, it was found that ELF waves may indeed be the mode of transmission of projected thought. Ironically, while Puthoff and Targ continue to disagree with the ELF wave hypothesis, continuing research found ELF wave effects in the human brain and not the phenomenon of remote viewing. Continue to disagree with the ELF wave hypothesis. Continuing research focused on ELF wave effects on the human brain and not phenomenon of remote viewing. Furthermore, the temporal lobes of the human brain became the targets of continued research using various forms of electromagnetic energy. This almost certainly ushered in the next phase of research known as remote neuromonitoring, and probably has the impetus for the development of the high-frequency active audio research program. HAARP is the multi-billion-dollar ELF wave generator nestled in the woods of Alaska and relatively closed to the public. Obviously, the CIA took ELF wave hypothesis much more seriously than some of the researchers experiment with remote viewing. And I'm going to go back to this part. One particular, I just wanted to get that, as it applied to targets in there so you could listen to the rest of it. One particular incident catapulted the CIA into parapsychological research business. In the early 1970s, President Nixon claimed that he and several others of his staff experienced inappropriate times of crying after a visit to the Soviet Union. It wasn't long after confession the CIA put $20,000 in Dr. Putoff's hands at the Research Institute, Menlo Park Research Center. Research and development in a remote influencing began with such notable characters as Ingo Swann, Uri Geller, Pat Price, and a handful of military recruits. The viewers were tasked with coordinates of known locations and asked to draw or describe what they viewed in the translated state from the research center. No clues were given, and most of the time research assistants were not even allowed to know what actually existed at the chosen coordinates. The resulting descriptions and drawings of the locations being tasked were eerily accurate and caught serious attention from the CIA and NSA. With the Soviet Union much further ahead in this type of research, could remote viewing be an almost impossible security breach to combat? Soon, INSCOM also researched in remote viewing with General Albert Stubblebine at the helm, a new ager seeking alternative paranormal projects. Stubblebine's projects were made popular in the motion picture Men Who Stare at Goats. Despite all the research and its success, a serious question kept arising. What's the mechanism behind remote viewing and remote influencing? The various theories put forth attempting to explain the mode of transmission of data in remote viewing have included F waves, tachyons, RF, and quantum theory. Putoff and Targ set out to determine the mechanism by placing remote viewers in anechoic chambers during their experiments. And anybody that wants to look up about an anechoic chamber, ANECHOIC. The chambers were checked for any electronic bugging devices and secured from any chance of the viewer receiving outside information. The remote viewers were still able to accurately describe their assigned coordinates without any notable impairment. The only electromagnetic waves known to penetrate anechoic chambers are ELF waves. Were the Russians correct in the ELF wave hypothesis for the transmission of telepathic events? In an attempt to answer this question, Putoff and Targ began measuring natural magnetic field fluctuations in the area by connecting an ELF signal amplifier to trees outside their office. Trees are natural best ELF and wave antennas. If remote viewing is depending on ELF waves, the severe fluctuation in the magnetosphere should interfere with remote viewing. According to Putoff and Targ, even large geomagnetic fluctuations did not impede success for remote viewing. To this day, Putoff and Targ disagree with the ELF wave theory and telepathic transmission. During this phase of research, attention was also focused on the brains of the viewers. They were given numerous psychological tests, neurological exams, and electroencephalograms. Magnetic encephalograms were performed at Los Alamos Laboratory to measure deep brain waves, which led investigators to suspect temporal lobe involvement in telepathic functioning. Amazingly, Dr. Pessinger's work, which has continued into the present, involves bombarding the temporal lobes of the brain with various forms of electromagnetic energy. While much of the research seems to border on the fringe of science fiction, it has continued in recent times. Remote viewing is still being actively studied by several privately funded groups made up of former Stargate test subjects. Several are known to hire out services. In addition, many of isolated or most influencing experiments have been successfully replicated by current researchers. Vasilov experiments were replicated by William G. Broad and Associates. Specifically, the experiments involving remote influencing a subject's skin and resistance response were done. The experiments were not carried out using special subjects known and with known telepathic ability, as they were under Vasilov's direction in the Soviet Union. Subjects were selected randomly from the community. One subject was selected as the influencer, and one was selected to be the receiver. The influencer was instructed to telepathically attempt to alter the receiver physiologically from 20 kilometers away, while the receiver was connected to electronic sensors to measure the skin's resistance. More statistically significant in the skin, electrodermal activity occurred with remote activation than without. These studies are viewed as successful replications of distal mental suggestion. And I know that was off topic, but I've been having this sitting on my desk for like a week. Well, not my desk, but the computer sits, table, whatever you want to call it. However, I wanted to get that out of the way. It's very interesting stuff. Anyway, I have some deep stuff coming up that pertains directly to targeting. And you ask, well, how can remote influencing be pertained to targeting? Well, really it can, because you can see what a target's doing from remotely. You could force speech, force movements if you're influencing them. However, you know, I don't know how far advanced that technology is, and I don't pretend to know. That was John Hall's opinion, and like I said, I wanted to get that out of the way. It's the last chapter in his book. I've covered his whole book in my videos, so if you're first time watching, you can go and scroll down. It's called Guinea Pigs. Very good book and different subjects. But anyway, God bless y'all, and I hope y'all have a great weekend. And I'll do a video tomorrow. Definitely. Anyway, God bless y'all. Have a good day.